Thank you very much, Amanda, for that generous introduction. I do say that I'm privileged I'm also honored to have been invited to speak on the security aspect of data protection. I'll also say, and as a reminder to everyone present here today, that you definitely don't want to miss the next session after this by Mr. Olumide Babalola. And the reason why I say that is this. I'm basically just touching the surface of data protection. And my main focus on my presentation is really centered on the security aspect. So when it comes to the legal aspect of data protection, which is what about 70% of what most data protection regulation is all about, then you definitely want to catch that in Mr. Olumide's session. So, thank you very much again for having me. I'll try as much as possible to see how we can get this done in less than the 1 hour, and also give enough room for questions and answers. So my name is Nurudeen. I'm the IT security lead for one of the oil exploration firms in Nigeria, one of the indigenous oil exploration firms in Nigeria. Even though I say I'm the IT security lead, I actually dabble into other aspects of IT and also things around data protection, privacy, and I also have good relationship with some of my colleagues outside of IT, basically governance, legal, supply chain. So I try as much as possible to learn from other team members, not only focus on cybersecurity, which has been my core domain over the years. I do have some bit of background in consulting. I've spent a greater part of my year doing consulting, security consulting for most organizations outside of Nigeria, in some West African countries, East African countries. And I was also part of one of the big fours in Nigeria, trying to build up the cybersecurity and data protection part of the firm at some point in time. I'm the co-chair of IAPP. IAPP is the International Association of Privacy Professionals. I'm one of the co-chairs in Nigeria. It's a body that's responsible for privacy globally. I also double as a co-founder of NigerSecCon. NigerSecCon is a cybersecurity community for Nigerians. Whether you are here in Nigeria or you're outside of Nigeria, I'm one of the co-founders. The community has about 400 to 500 members right now. It's something which we grew from about 6 members focused mainly on cybersecurity. We are up to about, say, 400 to 500 members right now, talking about all sorts around cybersecurity, technical cybersecurity, governance, risk, and compliance. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. You'll find all those details in the slides. That's just a very quick introduction. Please, Malik, please, if you can help me move on to the next slide, please. So basically, the outline of my presentation basically is I'll be focused on just 2 things, basically, right? I'm going to go down the rabbit hole of defining terms and terminologies. Most people who know me know I'm addicted to people understanding basic concepts, because my belief is that once we understand basic concepts, then all the technicalities or all the complexities, we are able to unravel them. So I'll spend quite a bit of time trying to understand or explain what the various terminologies or terms which we use in security is with respect to privacy and data protection. Then I'll spend very few minutes, right, speaking on the security aspect of data protection. I know I must have let some people down here. Maybe they are here for the security aspect of data protection, but I'll explain why I'm going about it this way. And as much as possible, I'm not going to talk about privacy and data protection regulation. Please, anytime I talk about that, I'm going to take a sip of water just to tell you how I don't want to talk about data protection regulation in this presentation. All right? Malik, please, if you'd help me scroll to the next slide, please. So in starting off, I think it's important to start up where all this started from. Right to privacy is actually given birth by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. It's in that document that you would find where right to privacy is actually being documented. And basically, the focus mainly is around the respect for private and human life. And I'll pause now and try to explain some of the details or some of the reasonings behind why do we need to define this in law, right? What we'll find is that back in the days, right, people were mainly focused on the protection of human lives, right? So let's go back to the cave era, right? Homo sapiens and the all other terminologies being used in science. People were basically, I mean, man was basically living in caves, right? If you leave it at the first slide, please, privacy, still at privacy. Man was basically living in caves. If you go back to privacy, please, go back, yes, please, thank you. So man was basically living in caves, right? And the main focus there is basically for survival and protection. Survival basically meaning he needs to find what to eat, cater for his family, and also protection, basically trying to secure himself from dangers from wild animals and from other Homo sapiens. But then as things advanced, right, the law as we have right now, even in 1948, also could not meet up with those advancements in technology. And that's why we've transitioned from what is being known as the right to privacy into what is known as the rights for data protection. So privacy by itself is just the right to be let alone. And a typical example is you go into an hotel and you hang this stuff by your door to say that privacy please, or do not disturb. That is basically what privacy is. But then it extends to all other forms of privacy. The privacy I'm going to focus in my presentation on is basically on informational privacy or data protection. I'm not going to say data privacy, please. Data privacy is one term that I normally crave from. So I'm focused on information privacy in my presentation. There are all other forms of privacy. So there's fiscal privacy, which basically means that I should be free from interference from my fiscal space, which means that if I'm in my house, I don't want anybody barging in through the door or coming in through the window. That's basically fiscal privacy. Informational privacy is basically the same as data protection, which basically focuses on personal data or privacy of information, which we'll get to. Then we also have some other aspect of privacy, whether it's social privacy or psychological privacy. And that leads into the next terminology, which I'm going to go into, which is basically data protection. So if you please move on to the next slides, please. So as humans evolved, we found out that the laws which were focused on privacy could no longer address some of the evolution of human. And that's why we now have the transition at some point in time, or the evolution of privacy into data protection. And data protection basically is focused on the right to protection with respect to processing of personal data. And the thought behind this is mainly that as humans began to evolve, right, from being thinkers or from being people who are actually farmers, we basically began to evolve to people who are using technology and generating millions and billions of information. And most of this information, or some of this information, are actually personal data. So there became the need to actually protect not only human beings in their physical form or protect humans in terms of securing them. They become a need to actually now start protecting data. And if you move on to the next slide, basically, that essence is really as regards, we began to generate an humongous amount of information, right? By using computers, by using mobile phones, by using tablets. In the next few years, or we have already started talking about them, we are already talking about IoT, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. All those things, all those technology evolutions is leading to a massive amount of data. And some of these data are actually quite sensitive, or they are quite confidential. And some of these data are actually personal data. And that's basically the need why we now we decided that we no longer need to only focus on privacy now. We also need to begin to focus on how do we protect that data, or how do we protect that personal data, right? And that's basically how the evolution of man also relates to the evolution of focusing on data protection and migrating that or moving that to data protection. Please, if you move on to the next slide, please. Right. So in this slide, basically, the focus basically is just to reiterate what I've said. In the Stone Age, the focus was basically as regards right to right to privacy protection. But right now, as human beings have evolved and computers and internet have actually given rise to the information society, which is what we call this generation which we have right now, there has been the need to actually evolve some of our laws, some of our common laws, which is focused on privacy, especially within the fiscal space, into what is now known as data protection regulation. And I must also state categorically here that it's not as if the right to privacy has actually evolved fully into the right to data protection. They are still two separate and distinct laws. Right to privacy exists side by side, the right to data protection, right? And I think in the next, I'm sure Mr. Lumide will go into some of these things as regards what are the similarities between both laws, and also what are the interference between, or the derogations between right to data protection and right to privacy. So that's basically just a quick introduction from me in terms of privacy and data protection. The next bit, which I would love to go to, which is the next slide, is, I was supposed to put up a poll question here, but then I'm just going to ask. If you have any thoughts, you can probably share them in the chat panel. So the question is, why do organizations exist? Right? And as professionals, whether in the law field, whether in security, whether in data protection and privacy, we need to often ask ourselves these fundamental questions, right? Organizations do not exist because of law. They do not exist because of security, or neither do they exist because of data protection. Organizations exist because they want to create value for their stakeholders, right? And that value can mean different things. It could mean that they want to make money, they want to be profitable, or it could also mean that they have some very social benefits, like the NGOs which we have these days. We have some social value which they create within the organization. So security, law, data protection are mainly enablers to help organizations achieve the purpose of their setup, right? So no organization today is established because they felt like security is the best thing to do. Let us create security, or let us create security as a value. Or neither would they say that, we are in existence because of data protection. The primary reason for organizations' existence is really around to create value for their stakeholders, to make money, or to be profitable. The reason why we bring security and all these other fields into play when it comes to business is because, especially for security, we want to ensure that organizations can continuously achieve the aim for their creation, which means that we have set up an organization to create value, to make money. What are the risks to that creation? What are the risks to that creating that value, right? Which is why you find standards and frameworks, for example, like COVID, will say that creation of value is divided into three things. Organizations realizing benefits, but it's not enough that organizations should realize benefits. You also need to look at what are the risks that could affect the organization from achieving its benefits or from achieving its purpose. Those risks, you need to optimize those risks. What are the resources in terms of people, infrastructure, technology that you need for an organization to achieve its purpose? Those resources, you also need to optimize those resources. So what I often use as an analogy to this is this. If we take a look at the human body, right? And we take a look at the circulatory system in the human body, we will know, or will testify to the fact that the human body does not exist because of the circulatory system. Rather, it's the other way around. It's the circulatory system that actually drives the functioning of the human body. So it's the human body that's actually the core, the organization by itself. Security basically by itself is basically just an enabler to help organizations achieve the purpose of their creation. So the question really is, what is now security, right? Before I delve into the other parts of security. Security basically is focused on, or if you help move to the next slide, please, it's basically the state of being free from threat or danger, and that's what security is. But for the purpose of this discussion, we are mainly focused on information security. Information security, by the definition of the ISO 27001 standard, which is like the de facto standard on information security, says is the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. What does that simply mean in layman's language? By confidentiality, what I mean is that I don't want people to have unauthorized access to my data. I have kept my data inside a computer system. I only want to ensure that people who are authorized to have access to that data are the people who have access to it. And that people who shouldn't have access to that data, they do not have access to it. That is basically what confidentiality is. For integrity, integrity basically means being free of unauthorized modification, right? I could have a breach of confidentiality, which means that people who are not supposed to have access to my data, they have access to it, right? But that might not lead to a breach of integrity, which means that the data is still intact. Nothing has happened to the data. But if those people are able to tamper with the data, they're able to change the content of my database, then that speaks to things around integrity because they've actually modified that data. And the other part of security, which people don't get to speak about a lot, is really around availability. And that is mainly focused on ensuring that data or information is available to people when they need it, where they need it, how they need it, and in the format which they need it. So all these three things are basically what is called the principles of information security. We have some other principles, things around non-repudiation, availability, reliability, and some other terminologies. But this is basically what is called the Triad of information security. And don't confuse this with the CIA in the US, right? This is basically called the CIA Triad in information security. Confidentiality, ensuring that people do not have unauthorized access to data they shouldn't have access to. Integrity, focused on people should not be able to modify data if they don't have access to that data, and also on availability. Thank you very much. You can move on to the next slide. Security by itself is not a binary term, right? And I'll get into some of the similarities between security and privacy. But what you have here basically summarizes what the whole of security, the whole of my 10 years in security, this is basically what we do every day, right? We have assets, which are called information assets, and assets could be anything in information security. So assets by their definition are any information that has value, right? Assets by their very nature in business terms are things that have value to the organization. So information assets are any information that has value. So they are like the crown jewel of every organization. Most information assets, they have what is called vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are weakness in information asset, or they could also be weakness in control. I'll give you an example. Say a car is an information asset, right? Because of the mechanical or electrical nature of a car, because most cars are electric these days. Technology by itself has some bit of weaknesses because, those weaknesses might be inherent or they could actually be non-inherent. By building technology, sometimes you build weakness into those technologies, right? So all information assets, they have vulnerabilities, right? And we have also what is called threats, right? Threats are those things that can exploit our vulnerabilities, right? Think of threats or maybe threat agents or threat actors as maybe a thief, for example. A thief would always want to come and steal something from your house, maybe your TV or your jewelries, right? What are the vulnerabilities related to your house where you live? Maybe you don't have a security guard. Maybe you have low fences. Maybe you don't have a gate because you live in the US or Canada. All those things are vulnerabilities related to your information assets, which is your house or your home. Threats are things that are emanating from threat actors like thieves. They come and robbery, for example, or attacking you. Now, so threats exploit vulnerabilities. So if you have a low fence or you don't have a gate, a threat actor could actually come in and rob you. So that's how threats leads to exploiting vulnerabilities, and it affects the information assets. So because we know that these vulnerabilities exist, what we simply do is to apply controls. Those controls are often called security controls. And those security controls can help us reduce vulnerability. So you have identified that you don't have a gate. Your security control is to put up a gate, but you feel like maybe a gate is not even enough, right? Let me put a biometric on my gate so that I can only use my thumbprint to come in, or I can only use a face scan to actually come into my house, right? That is providing you with additional controls. But sometimes when we also install controls to help us reduce vulnerabilities, right? Those controls by themselves also have weaknesses, right? So controls can also have vulnerabilities. But the whole essence of implementing controls is basically to help us reduce risk. And once we reduce that risk, it helps us reduce two things basically. The potential of the threats affecting our information assets, or the impact when that threat does, right? So risk is basically when we control risk or when we mitigate risk, we are focused on those two things: reducing the impact of a threat, or we are trying to reduce the probability of that threat happening, right? So if you put up a gate or if you put in a biometric device, that doesn't mean a thief might not come in, right? It basically reduces the potential of that thief. I mean, it needs to break the gate, it needs to unlock the biometric, right? But it doesn't mean that the thief cannot still come in, right? That's the whole way that information security and also risk work. So risk or information security cannot exist without having done this proper risk assessment or risk management. So that's why I say that we don't just do security for the purpose of security. We don't do security because it's the good thing to do, it's the best thing to do. We actually implement security controls to help us address the risk that we face. And in information security terms, what is being said is that we only implement security controls to ensure that we have the right level of security, which is what in data protection is called appropriate technical and organizational measures. And I'll get into that in the next few slides. Please, if you move ahead, please, in the next slide. Security controls. Please, if you have moved to the next slide, please. So security controls are basically things that we do to help us reduce risk, like I explained. But then there are different kinds and natures of security controls. And I thought it's actually quite good to mention this here because, I mean, I have quite a number of legal people on board. When we talk about the types of controls, we have just basically three types of controls. They are either administrative controls, which might be managerial or legal. So things around your, in legal terms, your contract, your non-disclosure agreements, your in administrative terms or managerial terms, your policies, segregation of duty, all those things are what are called administrative controls in information security. We also have the technical controls. Your technical controls are things around your technical or security solutions, right? Your firewall, intrusion prevention system, your identity and access management solution, and all those technology or all those shiny boxes, as we call them or cloud, basically, as we call them in security or technical terms. Then you also have your fiscal controls, which is basically focused on fiscal assets, basically. I mean, your fiscal assets control, your guards, and some of those fiscal controls, basically. But we also have controls being categorized into another terms, which is basically preventive controls. And the reason why I bring this up is very important, right? Especially as regards this masterclass. The categories of controls also help us in addressing what is called defense in depth, which is a fundamental security principle, right? I don't just put in, so like I gave in my example earlier on, I don't just say, you know what, I'm going to put a guard by the gates and that is fine, right? I have to put a guard there. I have to put a gate. Sometimes I have to put in a biometric device. Sometimes I have to put in a CCTV so that when all those control fails, right? And when the thief comes in, I am able to replay and detect that this is actually the thief, and which is why all these categories of controls are actually very important, right? So I have preventive controls to help me prevent that theft or that risk from happening, right? I have detective controls to help me detect that when it happens, I am actually able to respond to it. I have corrective controls, which can cut across both administrative, technical, and fiscal controls to help me correct after the fact. An example of a deterrent control is your, we all see these signs in homes where we see beware of dog. Sometimes there's no dog trying to protect you in that house, but then we put that sign up to say beware of dog as a deterrent to anybody that wants to jump into our house, to make them think that maybe there's a dog here, then maybe I shouldn't come in. Then we have recovery controls and also compensatory controls. I'm quite aware of time, so I'm going to move into the next slides. The next slide basically summarizes some of the intersections and the alignment between security and privacy. Please, if you help move to the next slide. In information security, when we talk about the categories of or the classification of information, please, if you move to the next slide, please. When we talk about the classification of information, we often use various terms, right? And I've just used some quite common classes here, right? In information security, you often classify information into, say, is it restricted? Is it confidential? Is it highly confidential sometimes? Is it for internal use? Is it public? But when we talk about information privacy, there are basically two classes of information. It's either personal data or sensitive data, right? I am not going to go into those various terms of what are the types of personal data, what are the types of personal data. I'm sure that that would have been covered yesterday, or if we have not covered that, I'm sure it's going to cover in the next session. But there is some bit of relation between information security and information privacy, which is what I called data protection. And some of the interrelations or the alignment is as regards things around accuracy, right? Information security and information privacy or data protection prescribes one of the principles of accuracy as part of both terms or both terminologies. The same thing as around access. You'll find principles in data protection that talks about access. You'd also have things around information security that talks about access. You'd also find the same thing around information security that talks about the accuracy of information across its life cycle. And you'd also find some of those things in data protection or informational privacy. Some of the things that you will not find in information security are those two things which I mentioned there. Data minimization, which is one of the principles of data protection, and also purpose limitation. You will not find those two terms being mentioned in information security. And the reason is clear. In information security, we are not really concerned around fundamental human rights. We are concerned around protecting data. It is data protection or data privacy that's actually focused on fundamental human rights. And I think it's also important for me to note here that when breaches occur, I'm going to talk about this too later on. It is not all privacy violations that are breaches, right? That are data breaches. I could violate a requirement in a data protection regulation or a privacy regulation, and it's not a data breach, right? So not all privacy violations are data breaches. And not all security breaches, right, could result to a breach of personal data. I'll take that again. Not all security breaches, right, has elements of personal data in them. So I could have a breach of security. And I'll get into breach because, I mean, that's a term that is being thrown around quite often. So let me just jump into the next slide. The next slide is a quote by one of my famous authors, Odeshina. He says, there are only two people in this world. There are only two people in this world I trust. You and me, right? And I'm not sure about you. These days, I'm not even sure whether I trust myself because sometimes I do things and I'm like, I mean, did I do that? So because we don't want our information security of our organization to be built on smokes and mirrors, right? What organizations do these days is to build fortress around the organizational security. And by fortress, what I mean is that they implement best practice standards for information security, or they implement frameworks or best practices for information security. So you'll find standards like COBIT. I'm not going to go into details of those standards, but I'll just give them a mention. You find standards like ISO 27001, NIST, PCI DSS, COBIT, ITIL. Those are some of the standards and framework that organizations actually use to help them implement information security best practice standards. I would ask us to take a look at those standards. I'll provide some references after this presentation, but it would be good for us to actually have a look at them. Because most of the audience here are actually people from the legal profession, I find that that's also important. Yes, please move to the next slide. That's also important that, let me ask that question again. Why security, right? And the reason why I say why security is this. Sometimes some of the crimes that are being committed actually does not affect just a single individual. It affects us collectively, right? And I thought it's actually best to actually make a quick mention of computer crime laws, right? And also talk about the various categories of cyber crimes or computer crimes. So the first one is basically computer-assisted crime. And for computer-assisted crime, the main focus is this. We are basically using a computer to carry out the crime. So the crime can be done with or without a computer. It's like stealing, right? Someone can steal today, right? Someone can steal your card data, right? Your credit card. You can physically steal that, right? You can steal your card, but then it could also use a computer to steal your PAN. All those kind of crime are basically what is called computer-assisted crime, because I'm using a computer to actually commit the crime. And I'll explain the reason why I'm talking about this. And the reason is quite simple. The reason why I'm talking about this is that some of this crime, especially for the first one, computer-assisted crime, you don't need any special law to be crafted to help you address those types of crime. Those laws, I mean, our common law today speaks to things around stealing and all that. So I don't need specific laws to help me to address computer-assisted crime, because common law actually deals with those kinds of crime. It's just that those crimes are perpetrated through computers. But I have things that are actually called computer-targeted crime, which basically means that these types of crimes cannot exist or cannot have taken place without a computer. And in that sense, I'm talking about things around DDoS attack, which is basically distributed denial of service attack, which is basically focused on a computer. I'm trying to say putting a malware on a computer, like what happened during the, I'm sure we've heard about Stuxnet, how the Iran nuclear plant was actually stopped. So all those are basically a computer-targeted crime. Then you also have what's called incidental crime. Some of the issues which we need to talk about, which is very, very important. And I'm bringing this in because this was not a slide I planned, but then I'm bringing this in because of some of the things which I've seen over the past weeks, especially on Twitter and some of the banks which are purportedly being breached, and someone saying that he has hacked into a bank or whatever it is, right? In information security, we need to be very careful. There's something called attribution, right? It is almost impossible for you to fully say that person A or Nurudeen Odeshina committed a computer crime. At best, you can say that a computer crime was committed from this computer, because it could be anybody that could be at the end of that computer at the end of the day. I'm sitting to you right now, you are hearing my voices, but then how are you able to ascertain that it is actually Nurudeen speaking to you? It could have been Mr. Olumide Babalola, or it could have been Ademola Adeyonju, or it could have been Amanda. Right? So in information security, attribution is very, very key. We often hear that a country has attacked another country, but all those things are based on not fully established evidence, right? They are based on attribution, because we saw that there is an evidence that the crime was coming from this country. That doesn't mean that I cannot go through a VPN, or I cannot mask my IP address and say, let it seem like I am actually in US committing that crime. So we need to be very careful about that. I also speak about transborder complexities, because I mean, that is one of the main concerns around prosecuting cybercrime. Someone can be in France or someone can be in Dubai today and is actually committing a computer crime against computers in Nigeria, right? Or so we've had the case of the famous, I'm not going to mention the name because I don't want to give the person relevance, that happened in Dubai, right? That was successful, but then we often have a lot of cyber crimes that could not be prosecuted as a result of their transborder nature. The other bit I want to mention is what I've mentioned earlier on data breaches, right? We need to be careful as regards the use of the word breaches. Breaches means so many things. A breach could be a network breach, which means that an hacker has been able to breach my network perimeter, but then they have not been able to exfiltrate data. In that sense, I have had a perimeter breach, but I have not had a data breach, which means that they have not been able to take hold of my data, but then they've been able to breach my network perimeter. I could also have a breach of privacy. I could have a breach of trust, and I could also have a breach of data. When data is being exfiltrated, that is when we can say that there is a data breach. But then the question also is, that data that has been breached or that data that has been exfiltrated, is it personal data? If it is not personal data, then it does not come under the scope of data protection regulation. Sorry, I've spent so much time trying to address that because I'm really passionate about people going around saying they've hacked systems or there's a data breach. Please, let's note that. The next few slides is because, or the next slide is basically Mr. Lumide Babalola said I'm a lawyer by association, right? I'm actually trying to study for a law degree. I'm hoping that someday I'll not only be a lawyer by association, but then I'll be a lawyer by profession too, right? But this is basically a recommendation, a feedback to every one of us, right? If you're not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer, right? Oftentimes within my organization, when it comes to understanding the provisions of the law, I am not a law expert. I am not a lawyer. I often defer to my colleagues within my firm who have spent their years analyzing the laws and also looking at regulation. And this also applies to data protection regulation. Like I said, a great part of data protection regulation today is about law, and it's about interpreting law. So I'm saying that let our lawyers, I'm basically saying that we need to cooperate when it comes to implementing data protection regulations. The lawyers amongst us needs to help us interpret the laws. The security professionals need to focus on protecting the organizations based on the provisions of the law, and the privacy professionals need to help us implement privacy controls, or help us address privacy and controls that are related to fundamental human rights. So as much as possible, let's all work together in actually implementing. It's not a one-size-fits-all. If you're a lawyer that wants to get involved in data protection and privacy and cybersecurity, you need the collaboration of your security team, your privacy team, and also maybe your governance team. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for the slide. So this is just a trick question, and I've answered it in the last slide. Which team in the organization should be responsible for privacy? And the truth is this: when it comes to the issue of the law, and I've learned this with my association with lawyers over the years, when it comes to issues of the law, there is no straightforward answer to everything. What I have come to learn also with my knowledge of data protection and privacy is when people ask me questions, I always tell them it depends, right? It depends. That should be the answer to every question with respect to data protection and privacy. Until you're able to put that question in context, right? I would say, just say it depends. So this question, the answer basically is it depends, right? It's not the security team, it's not the compliance team, it's not the legal team, it's not the privacy team. So it's basically a collaboration of the various teams that are responsible for data protection within the organization. Right? Please, next slide, please. So, like I said, I'm going to spend very few minutes. I know you guys are here for this, but I'm going to spend very few minutes on the actual topic, right? And I thought it's important that I explain all those terms because I'm going to be using them in the next few slides, right? So, going into the security aspects of data protection, and this is basically just what does data protection, what does the regulation talk about information security? In the next slides, I have a quote from someone I had worked with when I was in a consulting organization, one of the big fours. He was once our privacy lead, our global privacy lead. And I'll quote from what he said. He says that if data protection principles, please, if you move to the next slide, please. So if data protection principles are the celebrities of data protection world, then security is like the Kim Kardashian, right? Sorry, I don't watch Kim Kardashian, but I know that name. Security is like the Kim Kardashian, is on the A list, and it's a true VIP. And the reason is this: you can have security without privacy, right? And I've gone into explaining. I've provided an analogy, I think, with ALT at some point in time into privacy and security. But you cannot have security. You can have security without privacy, but you cannot have privacy without security, because part of the critical aspect of data protection regulations that we have today, most of those critical aspects are based on establishing security controls. And I'll explain this proper in my next slide, please. If you move on to the next slide. This is a quote from the GDPR, and it is not very dissimilar from what you have in the NDPR or the CCPA. The CCPA is the Californian Data Protection Regulation, or the LGPD, which is that for the Brazilian. You find contents like this in any data protection regulation, even the Convention 108, right? It says personal data must be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security. And the reason why I've highlighted this term, appropriate security, is because the people who designed this regulation, they have given thought into the use of words, right? When we say appropriate security, we are basically saying that security must be risk-based so that you don't overprotect and you don't underprotect, right? And what that basically means is this. I have a Maserati, right? And I decide that I'm going to park that Maserati in the streets of Lagos, or maybe in the street of Ajegule. I probably won't find a Maserati by the time I wake up the next morning, right? So what will basically happen is that I'll put my Maserati in the garage, I'll lock it up, I'll probably insure it, I'll put a guard there, I'll make sure it has biometric controls to actually help me assess it. But then I won't do that for a bicycle, right? Because it doesn't worth it. I mean, that is not appropriate security. That is just being overzealous, because what I'm basically doing there for a bicycle, if I put all those controls in place, is basically I am overprotecting what does not require that level of protection. So appropriate security is being used basically because to ensure that when we are talking about security in data protection, we are talking about risk-based security. Please, if you move on to the next slide, please. Some of the alignment between security and privacy, real quick. Security is just one of the principles of data protection or privacy. So we have about 7 principles, and security is just one of it. And what you find in most data protection regulation, even the NDPR, it's security is being couched under integrity and confidentiality. But like I said earlier on, security actually extends beyond both confidentiality and integrity. It extends to some other things. But you'll find that across all regulations, security is one of the prerequisites for achieving other data protection principles. So for example, if we take a data protection principle, say for example, storage, right? Storage, for example, right? I'm not going to go into the term it's called in actually data protection, right? For you to ensure that your data is actually stored, protected in storage, you need security. So you're talking about things around encryption, for example. To ensure that your data is actually protected during transit, you also need to talk about things around your VPN, your SSL in the application level, or VPN in the network level, or across the OSI stack, right? So security is one of the prerequisites to actually ensuring that you actually achieve compliance with data protection regulation or data protection principles. And you find out that in any regulation, data protection regulation there, when you find this term, which it says appropriate technical and organizational measures, without doubt, whenever you see that terminology in any data protection regulation or privacy regulation, without doubt, what is meant there is basically security. Whether that security is administrative in its nature, whether it is physical, or whether it is technical, or whether it's protective, detective, and corrective control. So appropriate by that term basically means we are following a risk-based approach to information security. So going to the actual items in data protection regulation, if you go to next slide, I have about 5 more minutes, right? So this is not specifically mentioned in data protection regulation, but it's something which we do in security. We need to govern information across its life cycle, or you need to protect information across its life cycle. And that is where information classification actually comes into focus. So in security, what we simply do is we often classify the information first before we protect the information. And it is very similar in what you find in data protection regulation, where it says that you should have a record of processing activity, because you cannot protect what you don't record. Or in security, it's been said that you cannot measure what you don't manage. And same way, you cannot protect what you have not kept or what you don't store. So you find data handling relating to things around record of processing activity within security. So the first step for everyone or every organization is you need to have classified your data across the life cycle, right from the point in time when that data is created to the point in time where it's actually being archived or disposed, for you to be able to ensure that you can actually protect that data. So if you move to the next slide, please. The other bit is around privacy by design and security by design. And the focus on security here. So you find privacy by design also being used in data protection regulation. But before we had privacy by design, which is actually a term that was coined by one of the information commissioners in Canada. And You can follow our Twitter handle. I mean, she gives quite nuggets on privacy and information security. We have always had security by design. And security by design basically means embedding security into the life cycle of every process within the organization, right from initiation to when we actually operationalize that process. So basically means don't bolt security on your processes or your technology. Ensure that your technology, right from the time when you are building or you are coding, ensure you actually build security into that life cycle. Please, if you move, the same thing applies to privacy too. So ensure that you actually build in privacy right from the point in time you are thinking about that technology, or you are thinking about that processes, or you are thinking about that policy. Ensure that you have security and privacy inbuilt from the very start. And this is what happens in every organization. In my organization today, we have a synergy between every team members, people who are building, the engineering team who are engineering new applications. If the application is going to impact on personal data or impact on fundamental human rights, they bring the privacy and data protection team on board to help them, right from the very start, address the privacy or data protection issues that may have concern. And the same thing applies to security too. We also build in security right from the point in time when you actually building the application. So you find the term application security or embedding security into the first few phases of development across the software development life cycle. Please, next slide. One of the things we also have mentioned in data protection regulation is the issue of controllers and processors. I'm not going to go into that term too, because I'm sure we are all familiar with that. Security also touches on that in the sense that you need to ensure that, like I said, in administrative controls in place, you need to ensure that you have the right security clauses into your contracts. And this also includes checking that your processors actually have achieved the right level of security certification. So it's not uncommon for organizations to ask their processors to show that they are PCI DSS certified or they are ISO certified. All those things are done as part of due diligence as part of managing third-party risk. The last slide I have there is basically when everything fails, right? Because we build in all the security across our people, across our technology, across our processes, but then there could be a breach, there could be an incident, right? So what happens? That is why in data protection regulation, there's a provision for breach notification and also incident response. I'll start it from incident response. Not all breaches are incidents. Right? Sorry, not all incidents are breaches, but all breaches are actually incidents, right? I've explained what breaches are. In every organization, what they basically do is they create a process to help them address incidents. So an incident could be anything, right? It could be there is a malicious or accidental breach of data, right? That is an incident which you need to actually respond to. Or there is a denial of service attack, for example. All those things are what we do as part of security operations. So it's not uncommon for you to find organizations, especially today in the financial sector, which I think I should dwell on just really briefly. You find financial institutions today, they have what is called a security team, or sometimes they have what is called a security operations centers, which help them monitor every single incident within the organization. And they are very quick to actually respond to that, right? So before you can find out that a bank, for example, and I'm just using that, it could be any industry, that a bank has been breached, not with the level of security that the Central Bank of Nigeria has mandated all banks, all financial institutions to go through. And I'll tell you for free that some of these standards which banks in Nigeria or financial institutions in Nigeria have gone through, some of their counterparts outside of Nigeria, even in US or in the UK, have not gone to that level of rigor in implementing those standards or security standards. So, I mean, you might find cases like that happening in terms of breaches, but then be rest assured that most of the organizations, most of the financial institutions have actually put in processes and technology in place to help them address some of those breaches. But then when those breaches happen, according to data protection regulation, they need to actually be reported either to the supervisory authority or to the data subject when they actually impact on the fundamental human rights of the data subject. And there are some provisions as regards how soon or when those things should be reported. But then, so I think that's basically, because I know I'm lost for time, if you help me move on to the next slide. But the key takeaway for me is this, right? And which is basically my parting words. When it comes to security aspect of data protection or security within our organization, we need to take into cognizance that we need to be careful around, we need to balance it. We need to balance both security and privacy, right? Like I said, privacy cannot exist without security, but security can exist without privacy or data protection. But then we need to balance both because they actually align, or there's an intersection between them. So the question you need to ask yourself, which one of the ladies which I follow a lot, you can also check, I have her name in the reference, is for every organization or for every security professional or every professional to ask themselves, is my security posture incurring intolerable privacy risk? And also, is my privacy posture incurring intolerable security risk? At the end of the day, what we need to do as individuals or what we need to do as organizations is to ensure that we can achieve an equivalent level of security and privacy in such a way that we're able to balance both of them. I think I'll stop on this note. I know there might be some questions. There are some areas which I've actually skimmed over, but then if you move on to the next slide, basically to see some of my sightings. Thank you very much, Amanda, ILC, Adeyanju. Thank you very much. You've been very beautiful in helping me controlling the slides. But then I'll take any questions in the next few minutes. And thank you very much.